Hello, my name is Matt Friedman, and today I'm going to be doing a talk called Be the Hero, Be the Change. In order to understand how somebody like me would kind of come up with this type of book, let me just start off with a little bit of history about who I am and how I got into all of this kind of work. I have been working on the issue of human trafficking for about 30 years, but I've also worked on many other topics. My career started in Nepal. I was there for 8 years. I went from there to Bangladesh for 5 years, 10 years in Thailand, and here I am now in Hong Kong. And during that time, I worked in 42 countries on public health, education, human rights, disease mitigation, all kinds of topics. And so what I'm going to start with is a little bit of a description of my experience so that I can talk about how I see this concept of hero and heroism that I'm going to apply back to you a little bit later. To begin with, when it comes to my human trafficking journey, when most people think about human trafficking, this is what they think about: forced prostitution, for good reason. There are 4.5 million women and girls in forced prostitution around the world. Now, my first exposure to this was about 30 years ago in Nepal. I was a public health officer, and my job was basically to translate resources into healthier people. At that time, we were finding girls 12, 13 years old who are HIV positive. If you know anything about Nepal, it's a very conservative culture. We should not have found that disease among that age group. So we went to go and talk to them. And we heard pretty much the same story over and over again. It went something like this. Human trafficker, guy around 20, 25 years old, would go into a village, flash a bunch of money around. He wanted everyone to think he was rich. He'd then go around saying, I'm looking for a wife. Don't want an urban wife, I want a rural village wife. He'd find a girl, 12, 13 years old. He'd befriend her and then go to the family and say, I'd like to marry your daughter. They're thinking, wow, he's rich, he's handsome, he's going to take care of our daughter. 2 days later, they actually have a wedding ceremony. The entire community is there. After that, he goes to the family and says, I'm going to take your daughter to the capital, Kathmandu, but don't worry, I'll be back in 3 months. But that isn't what's going to happen. Instead of taking her to Kathmandu, he takes her to Mumbai, India, to the red light district where prostitution is. He puts her in a room and he says, honey, stay here, I'll be back in a few minutes. As she was coming in, she saw all these people dressed funny, you know, all these men milling around. She says, no, don't leave me here. He says, it's fine, you just stay here. He then goes to the madam to get the $500 for having sold her to the brothel. He has the gold from the wedding, and he hands the wedding photos over to her. He then leaves to go back to Nepal to do this again and again, maybe 40, 50 times in a year. The madam then goes into the room where the girl is and says, guess what? Your husband sold you to me, and you're going to be with between 10 and 15 guys a day, every day. You can imagine her shock. No, my husband loves me. No, that's what happened. When she comes to internalize this, many of the girls say, I will kill myself before I do those shameful things. The madam then takes out the photos of the wedding and says, is this your mother, your father, your sister? If you hurt yourself, we will hurt them. So she's trapped in this situation. To make her into a prostitute, it's quite simple. You bring in a couple of professional rapists, and over a 2-day period of time, they rape this girl 20, 30, 40 times, until eventually she just lays back and accepts whatever happens to her. After that, she's put on the line, which means that she will be with between 10 and 15 guys a day, every day, for about 2 years. So she gets what's called black eye, where she's so depleted physically and emotionally and spiritually that nobody wants her, and they throw her out on the street. If she's lucky, she gets back to Nepal. Many of them languish in India, die there. Now, I was hearing this story over and over again, but I didn't understand the evil of it until I actually went to those brothels. I was invited by the Indian government to do public health checks. I was going from brothel to brothel, had a police officer with me, went into one of these places, and there was an 11-year-old trafficking victim. This girl saw this Caucasian guy, saw an opportunity, literally ran up and wrapped herself around me and said, save me, they're doing terrible things to me. I looked down at this child who was hysterically crying, wearing a dress 10 sizes too big, turned to the police officer and said, we need to get her out of here. said, you can't do that. So what are you talking about? You're a police officer. Says if we try to do that, we'll both be killed. To make a long story short, we left. We came back with a lot more police, but of course the girl was gone. Now I tell that story because I wasn't one of those 15-year-olds that said, when I grow up, I want to be an activist. In fact, I did everything I could not to be one. But as these situations kept building up, something changed, especially when you have a failure like this, where I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. After that, I started to spend more time at the shelters where the girls are to better understand their condition. And there was a particular shelter that I would go to, and there was a particular girl, Gina, who, for a variety of reasons, I just had a special friendship with. And the last time I saw her, after the day I had seen her the day before, she sent me a letter in Nepalese. And this is what it said. I look back on the day when I left my home. I was only 12. I was so happy, so full of life. I had such dreams. Now look at me. I will never marry. I will never have children. I will not see my next birthday. I need you to promise me something. I need you to do what you can to prevent any other girls from falling into this hole. Promise me you will end this evil. Promise me you will never stop trying. I don't care about myself. I'm done. Don't let any more of our sisters go through what I went through. You can probably imagine how I felt after this. And this for me was the point that brought me from being a regular person to an activist. I crossed over a line on that day because I did what a lot of people who get into activism do, is I just surrendered to the fact that now that I know about this, I can't turn my back on it. This is what I'm going to do with my life. And 30 years later, here I am talking to you. So what are we up against? What is the issue that we're dealing with here? And it really comes down to a global problem as big as the pandemic that we're facing now. There are over 40 million people in modern slavery around the world. There are more slaves today than any other time in history. There are more slaves than there are Canadians. 9.2 million people enter per year, 25,200 per day, or a new slave every 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Somewhere in the world, somebody's entering into modern slavery. When it comes to the different forms of slavery, it's not just women and girls, it's men and boys. This is a fishing trawler. The story behind this, a boy from Cambodia is told that he can go on this boat. He's told it's going to go out for about 3 months. He'll catch some fish. He'll make some money. He'll come back. He'll be a hero to his family. He gets on the boat. He doesn't realize he's been sold onto the boat. The boat goes out, but it doesn't come back after 3 months. It stays out for 4 years. He will work 17, 18, 19 hours a day, every day. If he doesn't, he gets beaten and tortured. The only food he'll have the entire time he's there is rice and fish, nothing nutritious. In order to get him to work, they give him strong stimulants. So he's constantly on these drugs. If he gets injured, if he gets sick, they throw him off the side of the boat. At the end of the 4 years, the boat comes in. He goes to the captain and says, give me something. Captain says, go away. You're illegally in our country. Guy says, I'll tell the police what you did. Guy says, go ahead. We own the police. This is another form of human trafficking. I worked in Bangladesh for 5 years, and during the time that I was there, a lot of trafficking happened around 2-year-old boys being trafficked from Bangladesh to the Middle East. Now, those of you who are parents know that a 2-year-old doesn't have the manual dexterity or concentration to do repetitive work. So what do you do with an infant? You put him on the back of a camel. Why? Because if you put an infant on the back of the camel, they kick and scream, and what does the camel do? It runs. So they race camels, and they bet on the races, and they use infants because they are light. Assuming the child is able to get to age 5, and not all of them do, many of them fall off and get trampled, he's starting to gain some weight. He's slowing down the camel. So they take this boy and throw him out onto the street. So at a time when most little boys are beginning their life, going to kindergarten, you have a 2-year-old boy by himself in a foreign country, doesn't speak the language. you can imagine what kind of life that child's going to have. Not very good. So what I'd like to do is just give you a couple of other nuances of the things that I experienced that kind of are strange, but it's not unique to this type of development work. So I once got a call. I was in Vietnam. This man calls me up and said, "Are you Mr. Friedman? You work for the United Nations?" I said, "Yes." He says, "I'd like to talk to you." I get these calls all the time. So I said, "Yes." We met at a restaurant. He was a very kind of charming, well-educated, well-dressed person. And for an hour, I talked about my work. When I finished, I turned to him and I said, "Well, what is it that you do?" He says, "Well, I'm a human trafficker." I said, "Excuse me?" So yeah, I'm a human trafficker. You know, I traffic women and boys and various other things. I'd never met somebody like you. I was always curious. Thank you very much for telling me all about your work. So I had two choices there. I could either get up and get really huffy and walk away or sit and listen. I stayed for another 90 minutes. He told me all about his business, went into great detail, even gave me his card, said, "Go ahead, try to catch me. I'm so well insulated." But one of the things that struck me when we were having this talk is he repeatedly said over and over again, "You guys are ridiculous. You have to follow rules and regulations and laws. We don't. You'll never catch us because of the situation that we're in. We mutate, we evolve, we change the moment anyone comes close to us." That was a very sobering moment. One of those moments that I realized the difficulty that we're up against in addressing something like this. At another time, we were out of our office, we had a hotline, and that hotline was run by a person who spoke Burmese. We had a Burmese girl call us. She said, "I was kidnapped off the street, thrown into a van. I'm in Thailand. I don't know where I am. Help me, help me." They didn't know she had a phone, and when they stopped for gas, she'd go to the toilet and call us up. So my employee came to me and told me about this, and initially it was just him listening, waiting for a call, and another one came another 2 hours later, another 2 hours later. We went from one person to 3 to 8 to 10 people sitting around with maps, trying to figure out, well, where is she? What did she say? What did you see? We came this close to knowing where she was. We were ready to call the police. And then the call stopped. You can imagine how that was. But the disappointments associated with this type of work is what goes along with something like this. And we have many of them. One more story. I was kind of in Bangladesh, and there was a girl. She was 16 years old. She was pulled off the street, put in a van, driven over to Calcutta, forced into prostitution, and she did that for only a couple of weeks. But we managed to get her out of there and back to Bangladesh. And we put her in a shelter, and we gave her some counseling and some health care and some love and affection and whatever she needed in order to get over it. And then we were going to take her back. So it was me, herself, and an NGO worker. We got into a van, we drove to where her city was, but somehow prior to us getting there, the family heard what happened to her. And when we got there, the three of us are standing here, the family's standing in front of us. Father says, "Go away. You can't come home." The girl said, "I didn't do anything. I was pulled, I didn't do anything." He says, "It doesn't matter. You brought shame to us. You have to leave. None of your brothers and sisters will get married if you basically come home." This exchange went on for about an hour. Finally, we left. Brought her back to the shelter. She sat by herself for 3, 4, 5 days at a time. And then one day she just wandered off. This is what culture sometimes does in these kind of situations. So here we are. We have 40 million people in modern slavery. Just to put this into perspective, last year, the world only helped about 100,000 of these people out. See that little red line in that donut? Those are the people we helped. The blue represents the people we didn't help, 0.2%. Out of 500,000 criminals, we were able to put about 8,000 of them in jail, 0.8%. Now, when you hear these numbers, you might ask the question, does the counter-trafficking world not care? Are we lazy? We're not doing our job? That's not the issue. The issue is this. The amount of money generated from modern slavery is 150 billion US dollars a year. The amount of money to fight is about 350,000 or 350 million, or 0.23% of that. There's about 15, 16, 17,000 people like me who are full-time addressing this against 500,000 greed-incentivized criminals. We have to follow the rules. They don't. And the last thing is awareness associated with this is very low everywhere. Very few people know about this particular topic. And so if you don't know about something, you're not going to care. If you don't care, you're not going to do anything. And that's part of the reason why I do lots of talks all over the world. So as a result of this, what we're dealing with here is the problem is this big, and the result is this big. And I'll come back to this point because it's important as I talk about other issues as well. But despite everything, we also have a situation where there's good news. There are programs out there that are doing well, and I'm just going to show you one very quickly. So we were working in Mongolia, and there were these girls who would read the back of the newspaper, and there were all of these ads that said, if you're between the ages of 17 and 21, you want to work in Japan in a restaurant and see the world, contact us. So they'd call up, they'd go through the process, they'd end up in Japan. 2 weeks later, on a false pretense, they'd end up in Macau, then forced into prostitution. They do that for 2 years, then go home. But because they would never get a husband and they would bring shame to their family, they couldn't tell anybody. So we knew it was happening. They knew it was happening. How do you stop it? So we got a phone, put a bunch of minutes on it, got somebody hired to answer the phone. And then we put an ad in the paper next to all those other ads that said, before you contact any of these other ads, contact us first. The girls would call up and say, do you have a job? We'd say no, but if you take these other jobs, this is what will happen. So we were able to prevent them from making a mistake. The second group of people who called were people who had been trafficked, heard about this so-called hotline, and they told us our story. So we went from 3 documented cases to about 300. The third group of people who called were the traffickers. You can imagine they weren't very happy. They'd call up and say, where are you? We're going to kill you, all this other stuff. But it was a cell phone. We had their number. We were able to go and figure out where they were and go after them. So this gives you an example of the fact that there are success stories despite everything I said. So what I'd like to do is just on your screen is a question. Do you have a cause that you feel strongly about? Just spend a couple of seconds just answering that. Many of us have causes, many of us don't have causes, but it'd be interesting just to see what the score is for something like this. So another 10 seconds. So about 82% of you have causes, the others don't, and that's unusual because there's a lot of people out there who don't know what their cause is. And as a result of that, they don't really know what they want to focus on. Okay, so based on all of that experience that I had over the last 30 years, I'd like to talk a little bit now about some of the things that I learned about kind of how to address the issues of the world and what do we need. The first observation I'd like to point out to you is this. The world needs our help. And it's not just human trafficking, it's pollution, it's hunger, it's clean water, it's animal rights, it's labor. Those are the global issues. But even on the local level, you have homelessness, you have mental health issues, you have unemployment, a whole variety of things. If you look around, you will see there is need everywhere. And just to put some of these numbers into perspective on the global ones, 5.5 million people die from pollution around the world each year. 783 million people without clean water. Close to 800 million people are hungry. 168 million. Look at these numbers. They're massive. And what's really important to recognize about them is that in all of these cases, we're failing. We're not coming anywhere close to being able to address these issues. Keep that in mind as we go forward. Look at the COVID-19 situation that we're dealing with now. We have pandemics all over the place. We have people in hospitals. We have potential for food shortages and so forth. Another example of need. Was anyone prepared for this? No. But is anyone ever prepared for these things? Probably not. The second point that I've learned over the years is that we don't pick our issue. Our issue picks us. I wasn't, as I said, one of those 15-year-olds who, when I grew up, I said that I wanted to do human trafficking. I tried over and over again to turn my back on that issue, but it kept coming back to me because something about it made my heart sing. Something about it was part of my DNA. And I say the same about all those other issues. For those of you who have found your issue, you have been able to get to the point where you know what it is, and that's a good thing. There's natural compassion in the world. Here in Hong Kong, you see these elderly people pushing cardboard. There was an example not too long ago where a woman was pushing this across the street in Central. The cardboard fell off. Within 3 seconds, from every direction, you saw people coming to help her. Some people were stopping the traffic. Some people were putting the cardboard back on. Some people were helping her to push it off. One person took her to where she needed to go. Nobody asked her. Nobody asked to do that. They just did it. It's spontaneous. It's a part of what we do as human beings. When we see people in need, we help them. That natural compassion is very much a part of who we are. Another thing I see is that I come in contact with a lot of people and they like their lives, whether they're students or in work or graduate school or whatever. But there's always kind of that inkling of something missing, a little bit of emptiness or a lack of purpose. And it comes up now and then. I hear this over and over again. I come in contact with some people and they'd say, why do you look this way? And they're like, well, you know, I just feel like something's missing. What I think is missing here is that there's an imbalance in a lot of people's lives where they take, but they don't give anything back. And I don't mean reaching into your pocket and getting money. I'm talking about actually kind of being a part of a process. So when you start to do things, when you volunteer, when you give of yourself, that balance gets corrected. And as a result of that, people start to feel good. They feel fulfilled. They recognize the gap that was there was the fact that they weren't doing something. And I'll come back to this point because I think it's really important. So the next question we have is, do you sometimes feel a desire to help, to get involved yourself? And take a couple of seconds to go ahead and do that. This one is a pretty easy one. I'm seeing 100% across the board here. And I think you're seeing pretty much the same thing. It's a part of our existence, this desire to get involved, desire to, and perhaps the fact that you're watching this was self-identification, that you already had that feeling and you wanted to perhaps move forward with that. Okay. Another observation that I've seen is that the human mind is great at talking ourselves out of things. So there's a little voice in our head and that voice tells us, yeah, I hear you want to do something, but what about this? One of the what about this is a situation where these topics are often considered to be sad or depressing, and so people don't really want to address them. And I know this because I wrote a book once, and I had people read it, and they get to page 37, and when they get to that page, they put the book down because it's the rape scene. It's a very emotional scene. It's very dramatic. It's hurtful to read that. So here you have a person in their living room, sitting on their couch, with the light on, with a cup of coffee, with the air conditioning on, and they can't get past that. I think it's extremely important that we push through and feel the pain of these people. We have to get over that feeling that life has to be happy all the time. That's an important part of the process. I'm too busy. This is another thing I hear. And I know we're all busy. But in Hong Kong, the statistics say that we spend about 2 hours on our phone a day and as much as 2 hours on television. We're not talking about days and weeks of time committing. If you decided to volunteer, you could probably find an hour a week from that busy schedule of yours to be able to address things. I have nothing to offer. I hear this all the time, and it's usually young people who say this. I'm just a student. I'm just a junior professional. I'm just an average person on the street. We all have something to offer. We all have a gift. We all have experience that allows us to do things. Don't ever allow yourself to tell yourself that. It's a lie. Because we do have things at all different ages. And I'll give you an example of that a little bit later. What if I start volunteering and I don't like it? It would be really embarrassing and disrespectful for that organization. Well, I work for an NGO, and I know that I would much rather have people try something and come to me and say, well, it wasn't for me, and walk away than never to try at all. An important part of this process is basically to get people to do things. And you're never going to do things unless you try things. So, our next question. Have you had situations where you talked yourself out of acting? Have you heard that voice? Here, the question is on the screen now. A little voice in your mind that's telling you that you, yes, I want to do it, but, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. Okay, once again, it's a universal situation. What I'm describing here is something that you all have experienced yourself. You all know what I'm talking about. Part of the problem that we're dealing with here is that many of us live a life that's fairly content. We don't feel hunger. We don't feel the need for fresh water. We don't feel the pollution. We don't feel the despair. We don't feel the terrible things that many of these people do. And as a result of that, what's the motivation for us to get out of our comfort zone? I'm fine, thanks. When you begin to feel things, things change. And it comes down to a word that you may or may not know. It's called velleity. So I was in Singapore and I did a presentation. As part of the presentation, afterwards, somebody comes up to me and says, your entire talk was about velleity. And I said, excuse me? Never heard of the word before. And basically, the person explained that velleity is a wish or an inclination not strong enough to lead to action. So you kind of have that desire to do something, but you don't get off the couch and do it. Now that is an extremely important word. And actually, if you put this into Word, it'll show up as a misspelling because it's not a word that is ever used. But I think it's a great word because it explains a lot of the behavior that many of us experience. So you have the voice in the head telling you something. You have the desire, but that voice prevents you from taking that step. That's an important part of what we're talking about. And for me, what that step means is it's important to get over the line. Now, in a lot of my talks, I talk about the line. And here's the line. On the left-hand side of the line is basically you learn something, you know something, you have interest in something. The other side is action. So let's say you didn't know about something, then you came to learn about it, then you came to care about it, and you wanted to do something. You get right up to that line. But one of the hardest things for all of us is getting over that line, taking that first step, taking that brave step, getting out of our comfort zone, experiencing change, all of those things, super important, super relevant, very much a part of what we need to do in order to get beyond our velleity. Okay, so we have a situation where there's huge problems out there. Problems both on the community level, you have problems on the global level. We have reasons why we haven't really done things. How do we go from that to the next step of actually getting involved in doing things? How can I help? That's a fundamental question. By being a hero. Now, heroism and the concept of heroism is very confusing to people. I often get in front of an audience of 100 people and say, how many of you in this room are heroes? I'll get one wise-ass person in the back raising their hand just to be funny. Everybody else keeps their hand down because they don't self-identify. They think heroism is basically jumping in front of a bus or going into a burning building. That's not what heroism is for me, and let me define it. When a person does a selfless act with no anticipation of getting anything in return, a kindness, a kind gesture, that's heroic. That's heroism. So if a person is walking in front of you and falls and you help them up, you've done a heroic act. If you call somebody up who's having a bad day, you've done a heroic act. What we're talking about here are gestures to help other people or the world. And so when I define it that way and then go back to the audience and say, how many of you are heroes? You can't help but put your hand up because all of us do heroic things. All of us do charitable things. All of us are helping. And why it's important to use the word hero next to it is we don't give ourselves credit for it. We don't give other people credit. We need to encourage people through positive reinforcement by using words like heroism and being a hero to encourage more and more of that activity to take place. Okay, so another question. Do you feel you are or could be a hero? Yes or no? Based on what I was just describing in terms of what we had here. Now we're seeing that the almost 100%, I think we're up to 88%. Those people in the no category, come on, give yourself a break. Join the yeses. Everybody can be a hero. Everybody. Okay, so how do we go from ordinary person struck down by velleity to a person who actually gets involved? The first thing that I want to say to you is it's extremely important to understand that you don't have to quit your job and go work in a shelter or fly to Cambodia. Many of the things that we can do are tiny little things that are small gestures, but if tens of millions of people did these small gestures, it would add up. So the first thing you need to do is to find out what makes your heart sing. What is your cause? What is the issue that does it for you? I tried many times to turn my back on human trafficking, couldn't do it. It kept coming back to me. You know what your cause is when you look at something and see it and feel it and want to keep going back to it. Maybe it's animals. Maybe it's the environment. Maybe it's oceans. Maybe it's depression. Maybe it's bullying. It doesn't matter. Figure out what it is. In order to do that, go online, look at YouTube videos, explore papers, go to presentations, read the newspaper, find that thing that is there. During this critical time of COVID, it's the same type of thing. A lot of us are sitting around in our homes. Why not use that time to help other people? Find out what element of this disease you feel like you can help out with. Can you call up somebody who's by themselves? Can you basically put a posting on your social networking talking about how to wash hands? What is it that you feel that you are inclined to be able to do those things? And again, these are quite small. They don't have to be big things. The next thing is to accept some responsibility. We share this earth with all of the other people in the world. We share the air, the water, the land, the animals, the plants, all of these things. Whose responsibility is it to take care of them? We can't put that all on the government or the United Nations or the NGOs. We have to accept some responsibility ourselves. Accept that responsibility. This is your world. It's everybody's world. We can't expect everybody else to solve the problems. So even if we take a small piece of it and work on it, again, figure out your cause, accept some responsibility. The third thing you need to do is to surrender. And I don't really even know how to describe this other than to I'm just going to do it. Nike got it right when they had that phrase, just do it, because it's a call to action that says, I'm not going to listen to anything else. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it happen. That surrendering gets rid of all of the voices that you have in your mind. It turns it off. It allows you to say, I am going to go forward and I'm going to make it happen. And then you do something. Anything. Now, what are the things that you can do? People usually at this point, again, they're seeing me as an activist thinking, well, I didn't take that life course. What can I possibly do? Well, first thing is to go through this process. I call it DASH. This is the acronym that describes it. Decide your issue, accept responsibility, surrender, and help. It's fairly straightforward. It doesn't require much rocket science to be able to go through that process. But the first thing you can do, and this is the easiest thing, and anyone can do this from their home, is to learn about the topic that you're most interested in. Go online, become a mini expert, keep reading about it. And once you have learned that, share that information with somebody else. By learning, you've done one thing. By sharing, you've done something else. Teach your kids about it. Sit down with them, go through it, watch the videos with them. These types of things can be done anywhere. And most people, when they think about this, are thinking, well, you know, it's not that relevant and important. Well, it is, because much of the problem is a lack of awareness. The second, you can join or participate as a volunteer. And again, my organization, many of the volunteers work from home. They're professionals who have full-time jobs, and those jobs are quite fulfilling, but you know, I give them a task and they do it from home. Volunteering can be done at every single age. I got a call from, or an email from a girl who was 9 years old. She said, Mr. Friedman, I want to volunteer. I said, you're 9 years old. She said, so what? I said, you're 9 years old. She said, 9-year-olds are the new 16-year-olds. Give me a chance. So I did. I allowed her to do internet searches because that's what she said she was good at. And she was better than my second-year Yale law student at finding stuff on the internet because she had an inherent gift at doing that. It's just what she did. Donating or giving. There's a lot of organizations that are struggling, especially now, because you have people aren't donating to the causes out there now. Donating a small amount of money, you know, fundraising can really go a long way. Just to put this into perspective, there are some shelters in Cambodia that have trafficking victims that for $5 US a day, they will take care of this person. Maybe the state will cover 2 weeks, maybe they need another 2 weeks. Your small contribution, giving up one big, going out on a Friday night meal, giving that money to the right organization can make a difference. All of these things are heroic. All of these things add up. All of these things are contributions to making the world a better place. The last thing I want to say about this is that, as I said, we all have a God-given gift, an inherent thing that we're good at, a personal talent. For some of us, it may be dance, it could be singing, it could be public speaking, it could be writing, it could be selling t-shirts, it doesn't matter. If you're able to find your cause and apply to that cause, what it is, your gift is, it's a double win. Because you're doing something you naturally feel good about, you care about, you're adding value, and all of these topics that I'm talking about, even human trafficking, we've used dance interpretations, we've used music, we've used public speaking, we've sold t-shirts, all of those, and every other issue is very much the same. So, another question, I think the last one, do you feel you have a personal gift you could use to help the world? Something that is inherently yours, and maybe a lot of people don't know it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that don't even know that they have gifts, or they haven't really thought about this. I can see that you all understand what I'm talking about when it comes to this idea of a gift, because we're almost at 100%. And that's a great thing to see. Okay, so I'm going to just tell a couple of more stories and then I'll end. Many, many years ago, when I was still in Nepal, I desperately wanted to do something to address the issue of modern slavery. So I decided I was going to write a book. As part of this book process, I went from shelter to shelters to interview the women and the girls. I went to one shelter and there was a girl named Gita. And every time I approached her, she said, no, 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 I don't want to talk to you. But she sat and listened to all of the other interviews. When I finished there and I was leaving, all of a sudden Gita comes running up and says, I've changed my mind. You can have my story. I was thrilled. Gita sat on one side of the table, the rest of us sat on the other side of the table, and over a 3-hour period, she told the worst story I had ever heard of rape and torture and betrayal and murder and betrayal, everything you could possibly imagine. I honestly didn't know what to say to this girl. Finally, I turned to her. I said, wow, Gita, you must be so angry at the traffickers for the horrific things they did to you. She paused and paused. Then she said, no, I'm angry at you and you and you. She pointed at us. She said, where were you? Said that every single day she woke up praying for somebody to come and help. Nobody came. Said she went to school till she was 12. She knew that everything around her was illegal and happening right in the open. She said she wasn't angry at the traffickers. She said they're just bad people being bad people. She said she was angry at the good people, at society, for not caring enough to allow a 15-year-old girl to be commercially raped 7,000 times and then to get a disease that's going to kill her. She understood that the 15,000 of us around the world aren't going to cut it. We need everybody to have take a stand. Lots of people, the general public, the schools, the faith-based groups, the corporations, everybody to take some responsibility. I come back to that word again, responsibility. And then to surrender to it and to do things. Now, people say, well, if we're at 0.2%, it's impossible. You can't possibly achieve this. Let me give you an example of how it wouldn't be impossible. So let's say that there is an asteroid that is coming to hit Earth. And there's 2 years between where the asteroid is and us. And we were told that if we could end modern slavery in 2 years, that asteroid would go off to the left or to the right. Do you think we would end modern slavery? You bet we would. If our survival was meant on it. It demonstrates that if the right combination of factors, and if there's a will, there's a way. So it's not impossible. It's improbable maybe, but it's not impossible. But certainly we can do better than 0.2%. I show this picture, I don't know where this is, but it's kind of a huge sand dune made up of billions and billions of pieces of sand. And what this demonstrates is that small particles in huge quantities can add up to something magnificent and huge, as you see here in this photograph. The same can happen if you can get 10 million people to step up and decide to get involved and to do something. If 10 million people did that something, it would add up to something quite big. And that's what the Be the Hero campaign is all about. Getting people over their validity, over the line, to a point where they accept some responsibility, surrender to do something, they do something, and from there, we move on to making the world a better place. And so with this talk, we are launching the Be the Hero campaign. It's not about raising money. It's about helping to inspire people to act, to offer the tools. So the book that you see, and you'll see in a moment, is one example of what is offered. There's videos, there's podcasts, there's testimonies, we're trying to get volunteers to volunteer. And our hope from today is to get 100,000 people to self-identify as saying, I did something. And if that means just watching a video and telling one other person you've done something, and anything else. And if you do 10 things, 15, I don't care. We just want people to do it. So that's what we're doing here today as part of this process. This is the book that we're launching today. It's called Be the Hero, Be the Change. It was written for anyone who has that inkling or that idea of wanting to kind of get out of their comfort zone, to step up, to accept some responsibility, and to help be a part of making the world a better place. If you're interested, get the book. All the proceeds go to COVID-19. And what we're trying to do is to use it as a means to educate and inform people about what's going on. And if you're interested in joining the campaign, BeTheHero.com campaign, go on there, you send us an email, we'll find a way of getting you involved. With that, thank you very much.